Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. A little bit of an impromptu show. We did bring you, especially if you're on our YouTube channel, we did bring you quite a few episodes throughout the week. We spliced up some of those prospect previews we did on Kamari Ramsey and Mekhi Lemon. And of course, we brought you the very fun interview we did towards the beginning of the week with T. Higgins and Chase Brown. So go catch up on those. Those are embedded on Cincy Jungle and A to Z Sports. John did a nice write-up on Chase Brown talking about Ted Karras's leadership, that sort of thing. So go check that out. Of course, our show, part of the Believe Podcast Network and the Believe in Cincy Podcast channel, brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Obviously, a big week ahead for that site with the Super Bowl coming down, coming down the pike, and FOCO, the fans only company, where you can get your exclusive Bengals merch or other teams. If you got some people having some birthdays and they like some other teams aside from the Cincinnati Bengals, you can get them some exclusive stuff found only at foco.com. Both of those links are in the show description. I'm going to take a deep breath and welcome in John Sheeran, who, full disclosure, John got mad at me for my outfit today before we took the air. And I love you, John. I'm sorry. I am a little, it's a little warm, but I know that's not how it is across the U.S. right now. How are you doing, buddy?
Listen. I was in a decent mood, but then the first thing I noticed when I see the screen is Anthony's shoulders and part of his chest exposed while his garage door is open with sunshine beaming from the back of him. So excuse me if I was a little perturbed at the fact that it's 19 degrees outside and the snow that started coming down like a week ago hasn't even remotely been close to melting yet. So other than that, I'm great though. And we haven't done a Remember When in a long time, Anthony, if we're going to go back to football here. But we haven't done that in a while. But I think it would be, I guess, apt to do it today because 4 years ago, the Bengals were going to the Super Bowl. 4 years ago today, that happened. And look at where we are now. Time flies.
Yeah. And not to keep hating on the whole weather situation, but I went to that game and that was a scorcher that day for some reason. Gosh, it was like 90s that day. It was really hot. But anyway, I'm sorry, buddy. By the way, I wasn't like showing off my shoulders and my chest. I don't know.
I would
want to take that. I don't know. Anyway, welcome to everybody tuning in live. And if you're tuning in after the fact, that's fine too. If you are tuning in live via a number of different platforms, again, a little bit of a late notice and impromptu show, but we are taking some listener questions. We've already kind of got some things thrown our way throughout the week and different things. So we'll touch on some of those, but leave them in the chat. Whether you're on YouTube, the Cincy Jungle Facebook page, or one of the Twitter accounts or X accounts, and we can answer as many as we can. We'll do that more towards the back half or so of the show. Most of the show, we're just going to touch on some news stuff and different things as well. So let's get started with that. The Pro Bowl has become very interesting, John, in case some folks haven't been paying attention the last couple of years. It was once a star showcase, and then it kind of caught a lot of flack because it became almost like a two-hand touch type defensive performance. So they changed up the Pro Bowl to try and revamp the thing and get some interest in it leading up to the Super Bowl. And now we've got Shedeur Sanders making the Pro Bowl with a more interceptions and touchdowns type of season. Joe Flacco, who had a great statistical season, at least in the stint with the Cincinnati Bengals for a good chunk of the year, it was announced, I believe, on today, Friday, that he is making the Pro Bowl as a late addition. And deservedly, T. Higgins, who had a career high 11 touchdown catches, and we talked to him. He remembers quite a few of those spectacular catches. At least he did in our interview when you asked him about that, John. He deservedly makes the Pro Bowl and gets to call himself a Pro Bowler from now on. But a couple of Bengals in it now, a couple of late additions, but the Pro Bowl still is not without its flaws.
No, it is not. And I mean, there hasn't been a lot of things in the NFL that has been changed and tweaked to more than the Pro Bowl in the last 10 or so years. I feel like it was 11 years ago when it wasn't AFC, NFC at that point. It was like two different like captains picking teams from both conferences. And in that draft, like Andy Dalton, who was an alternate to the Pro Bowl back in that year, he was like the last pick in that draft. So people were tired of like the AFC and NFC dynamic because at in certain years one conference is stronger than the other, and that's ultimately why Shadur Sanders and Joe Flacco are Pro Bowl alternates this year. It's a testament to how relatively weak the AFC was in terms of quarterback talent, just
Right.
terms in general, right? So either guys get injured or players have down years. I mean, Patrick Mahomes obviously has a torn ACL and he didn't really have that good of a season, anyways. Joe Burrow misses half of the year, and I suppose that he probably I would imagine that Burrow had more votes for the Pro Bowl than Joe Flacco, or in some way, shape, or form, like he could have been able to get in there, but either he declined it or he opted out of it because he's dealing with the turf toe injury, whatever the case may be. Opt-outs at the quarterback position and just a down year for AFC quarterbacks in general because the NFL went back to the AFC and NFC format is why Shadur Sanders, who got, I'm assuming, a ton of fan votes because he is Shadur Sanders, and Joe Flacco, who became a great positive national storyline once he got traded to the Bengals and had his whole shebang there. That's why they're in the Pro Bowl, but you're right. It does speak to how like the honor of being a Pro Bowler doesn't mean as much in 2026 as it did back in 2006, right? It's good that T. Higgins, who's a second alternate, like he only had to have Zay Flowers opt out in order to get a Pro Bowl, and I think he very much deserves this honor at least at some point in his career. So there is some nuance in terms of who is a worthy Pro Bowler and who is not when it's all said and done with the alternates and everything like that. But that's ultimately why these quarterbacks are in, and it's fun when Joe Flacco's in there. But again, it's the Pro Bowl in 2026. What are you gonna do?
Yeah, and if Flacco's winging it to Higgins, that'll be fun to watch. Look, I mean, again, I don't want to diminish any accolades, but as you mentioned, I mean, the two quarterbacks in the Super Bowl, those are guys to that would have been, especially May would have been in that conversation. He obviously opts out of it, and then of course, you had Bo Nix, who would probably be in that conversation as well, broke his ankle, and so you got to go down the pecking order a little bit. I mean, Joe Burrow, statistically, even though he played just a handful of games this year, I mean, you look at his stats compared to Shadur Sanders and you go, okay, well, what was the deciding factor there? Regardless, if only the Higgins news came a day earlier when we were chatting with him, that would have been fun to chat with him about. But they are Pro Bowlers. And now just a little bit of a different spin before we switch topics to kind of some NFL news. Want to remind folks again to get in your questions for our listener questions live stuff coming up later. But obviously there's a lot of stuff going on right now regarding the Hall of Fame. And, a lot of, I mean, somehow, you talk about there's talk of Bill Belichick not being a first ballot Hall of Famer for whatever reasons. And then, somehow that turns into a conversation that slights Bengals greats with him not getting in and all that kind of stuff. I'm not going there. In years past, one of the benchmarks or metrics that a lot of writers and voters used, and a lot of the general public used, were Pro Bowl berths, obviously all pro nominations, that sort of stuff too. And so now I wonder, to what is already a flawed and convoluted voting process for the Pro Football Hall of Fame, I wonder what, not Pro Bowl nods and yes, Pro Bowl nods, what that means in, the next 5 to 10 years and beyond for some players that, are looking to get Hall of Fame runs if they don't have some of these Pro Bowl nods because they either opted out because they were in a playoff run, Super Bowl run, injured late in the season, or some of these guys that maybe get these inflated or manufactured substitute Pro Bowl nods that, kind of muddy the waters for some of the older candidates, that sort of thing. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. It's a process that the Pro Football Hall of Fame and the voters are going to need to figure out for sure.
Yeah, Pro Bowls have always been, like you said, a benchmark and like a factor in terms of whether a guy is worth it or not. And part of that, I think, is because like we didn't have as much information. Like obviously, like sacks weren't an official stat until like 1976 or whatever the case may be,
Right.
right? And
Right.
now we've like retroactively have counted sacks from the beginning of the NFL, the beginning of the NFL, or way beyond like when they were officially counted. So Pro Bowls were this basic standardized like, hey, like you're one of the top 5 or 6 players at your position, and the process wasn't as convoluted as it is now. There's not like part of the voting is from fans, part of it is from players, part of it is from coaches. It's designed to be a more cohesive, collaborative effort to get this all-star game in here, recognizing the game's best players who may not be all pros necessarily, right? But obviously all pros are going to be Pro Bowls probably more times than not. So
Right.
I think in a perfect world, in the last 15, 20 years, when we have outlets like Pro Football Focus, we have other ways to quantify how good a player has been. And obviously, tape has never been more accessible for writers and the general media and the general public in general. There's much more access to gauge how good or dominant a player has been, and that can support their case to becoming a Hall of Famer instead of relying on Pro Bowls, which, like you said, has become less and less valuable as time has gone on in terms of what that actually means. So, in a perfect world, that is what I hope. But as we've seen, like in terms of who decides who becomes a Pro Bowler or who becomes a Hall of Famer or not, you can't rely on logic to always, enter the conversation with these things. So I don't know how it is going to impact the next, 20 or 30 years when you have more, guys who are playing right now who, again, like we can identify who is good and who is not just be well beyond just how if they made the Pro Bowl or not. I hope that all that information comes to fruition in terms of identifying who actually deserves to be in there. But I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see because what like the conversation around the Hall of Fame right now, it's a lot like I think what many Bengals fans have been saying for many years, but now it's entering the national lexicon in terms of like the conversation being like, yeah, it's kind of been like this for a while, has it not?
It has, and the other thing too is okay. Let's just let's just continue down the Belichick thing, where some people think either his prickly personality or the deflate gate and spygate and all that kind of stuff may or may not have played into, and I don't think it's been definitively announced yet, right? But the rumor mill is that he's not going to be in on the first try here, and he's going up directly as kind of in this senior pool. Ken Anderson, LC Greenwood, Roger Craig, his former the team owner Robert Kraft. So we have yet to see how that all kind of shakes out. They can take a maximum of 3 of those 5 names, but obviously there's a bit of, and some of that stuff was years ago, but there is still a recency bias to hold him against if that was indeed held against him. And so I guess where I'm going with that is when you look at a guy like Chad Johnson, who has a legitimate Hall of Fame argument based on his his stats and what he was doing for a handful of years. He has 6 Pro Bowls. Do you then, as a Hall of Fame voter, when you look at some of the guys who have been placed into this Pro Bowl nomination, do you then look at that from today's eyes instead of mid 2000s eyes and say, well, 6 Pro Bowls, that's not, I mean, what are Pro Bowls, right? At this point, that's kind of a worry for me. Even a guy like Geno Atkins as well, right? I think he had 8 Pro Bowls or something like that. Does it get taken with a grain of salt now because of some of these guys that get added? Again, not slight. I don't want to personally slight certain players and stuff, but I think there's a prevailing air or attitude around the Pro Bowl at this point in time, and I just worry that some of these guys that are deserving, that are Bengals players that have a lot of Pro Bowls, may kind of get scoffed at because of what the Pro Bowl has become of late.
I mean, I guess fortunately we've seen 2 extra Bengals become Pro Bowlers, so I don't know if that's like a shift in the other direction in terms of
Right,
Bengals players are
right.
becoming more like what's the word I'm looking for here? Like they're like you include them more into the conversation of players who deserve some of these honors and these accolades, and that can trickle down into it. But like you said, I mean, yes, I think that is a valid concern, and as a general football media world, we have to recognize like the evolution of how we evaluate players changes the more information that we get, and it goes beyond just the same accolades that we've used for decades now. And I think with Gino's case, obviously he's a 2010s Hall of Fame team member, and more times than not,
Right.
like
All
90%,
decade. Yeah.
95% of those guys are all in the Hall of Fame. It may take them a while, but more times than not they end up getting in there. The thing with Gino is that, he was never really in the media at all. Like, you never really heard him talk, and I think rubs some people the wrong way as well. I Unfortunately, I think with Belichick and the whole controversy there, if we're going to expand upon this, is the people who didn't vote for him, at least the people who have spoken up about it, were more concerned about getting the other senior candidates in now, knowing that Belichick will
Yeah.
eventually
Yeah.
become a Hall of Famer. And it's almost become a negative thing with Ken Anderson. Like, he's a part of the senior nominees that some of these voters have voted for, and they prioritize Ken Anderson over Bill Belichick. So in this whole uproar about like, oh, like how could you discredit Belichick by not making him a first ballot Hall of Famer? At the same time, you're like, well, you shouldn't vote Ken Anderson in there when Belichick's an option. Like, the whole issue is that Ken Anderson isn't in the Hall of Fame yet, and it's a problem from years ago, from decades ago. The fact that this guy isn't in there,
Yeah.
so it's like this outrage is just a culmination of a flawed process that's been decades in the making, and it's now coming to light in a much more explosive way because, of course, Bill Belichick is one of the greatest coaches of all time, arguably the greatest coach of all time. Of course, he deserves to be in there. And their argument is that if we can't vote in all these senior candidates, then we have to prioritize maybe the guys who've been waiting longer. And it sucks for Ken
Right.
Anderson, who's now being thrown under the bus because of it.
It's yeah, and then there's a log jam that occurs over years, and guys, you go, oh yeah, that guy's still not in. Oh, it's there are problems with it for sure, and the voters and the Pro Football Hall of Fame needs to figure that out, and hopefully Ken Anderson gets his due this year. Again, that's not saying something against Bill Belichick or anything like that. Like you said, it's like that in itself. It's like, well, we got to get this guy in because he's been waiting so long, and Bill will get in eventually. Like, that whole mindset is just it's ridiculous. So the best guys should get in. There are Bengals players who are and will be deserving when they are eligible. Hopefully they get their due and the Hall of Fame starts to get things dialed in. We're going to shift to NFL news, but just briefly, because a couple of headlines, especially within the AFC North and the NFL landscape, are pertinent to the Bengals. But again, just want to reiterate, get your questions in. I think we have a couple that have come in on the live chat, so get those in. We're going to get to those in just a minute here. So get those, and we will answer as many as we can as we are here on Friday afternoon. So NFL news, Cleveland just seemingly struggled getting a head coach, and a lot of guys are saying thanks, but no thanks. They kind of flirted with them a little bit, and then it never really went anywhere. There was a name and a guy that I think was linked to the Bengals offensive coordinator position, if I'm not mistaken, back when Zach Taylor first took the reins for the team. Todd Monken, who's bounced around the league and has had ties with the Ravens, et cetera. He is now the head coach of the Cleveland Browns. What do you think of that hire, John? Good, bad, and different? Or is it, to me, it was kind of like the defensive coordinator search for the Bengals back in the early Zach era, where it was like Jack Del Rio, thanks, but no thanks. A lot of names that we can go into anyway. Your take on the Monken hire for the Browns?
I feel like my take here is not as interesting as what actually happened like behind the scenes here. It's like the Browns had this very intricate and frankly odd process of interviewing these coaches and requiring them to take like tests and like do homework or something like that. It was a very unorthodox way of like basically whittling down like who is deserving of this job, even if it's the head coach of the Cleveland Browns. It's a job that typically goes in and out every 2 years.
Yep.
But again, like that's what the Browns decided to do. And the owner, Jimmy Haslam, is so desperate to keep Jim Schwartz on as defensive coordinator. And to a certain extent, that makes sense. He's one of the best defense coordinators in the league. It's, like I mean, the Bengals surely respect Jim Schwartz as a defensive coordinator. They've had a quite their fair share of struggles scoring against them over the past few years, but it becomes such a hindrance in the process that Grant Udunski, who is the Jaguars offensive coordinator, he is a candidate to be the Browns head coach. He's almost the favorite at one point, but he doesn't want Jim Schwartz as the defensive coordinator, so he bows out, like, because that's a requirement. Nate Scheelhaase, I really don't feel like I'm pronouncing that name right, but the pass game coordinator for the Rams, it's the same situation. Like, he's one of the finalists, but he doesn't necessarily want Jim Schwartz as his defensive coordinator, even if that's the candidate that GM Andrew Barry wants and like the whole hiring committee wants. Like, Jimmy Haslam desperately wants Jim Schwartz on as his defensive coordinator. And if it takes hiring Jim Schwartz to be the head coach of the team, he would be willing to do that. So then Jim Schwartz all of a sudden becomes the favorite to be the head coach. But then Todd Monken, who is the other candidate here, he's the one non-Jim Schwartz candidate who would be okay with having Jim Schwartz as his defense coordinator. So the Browns end up going in the offensive coordinator direction to hire an OC as their next head coach, assuming or with the belief that Jim Schwartz is going to stay on as defense coordinator. And then Jim Schwartz is pissed off that he got passed over to be the head coach for Todd Monken, and now he doesn't even want to be the defensive coordinator. So the whole process completely blew up in their face, and it will blow up in their face if they aren't able to keep Jim Schwartz in the building. Now, Jim Schwartz is still under contract for the next 2 years, so it's not like he can just go to another job. He would have to probably retire or whatever the case may be, or maybe the Browns have to just throw in a ton of money at him, just like they did Myles Garrett last year. But the whole thing is hilarious because obviously who wants to be the head coach of the Cleveland Browns with the state of the organization and the fact that the whole hiring process went down like this. But it could be a situation in which they hire the head coach that they probably didn't want, but the only one that would accept their defense coordinator, and their defense coordinator might not be there after all.
Yeah, a lot to unpack here. And like you said, in order, it's going to take a lot of damage control and appeasement of Schwartz to stay on, and maybe that adds on, an assistant head coach title or all that kind of stuff just to kind of placate him. But there's it would seem, and I don't know the inner workings of it, but it would seem as if Schwartz felt like the rug was pulled out from under him, right? Like he just felt like, okay, these guys aren't coming through. I've led a stout Browns defense, including the best defensive player in the league in Myles Garrett on my unit, and he keeps setting records and doing his thing. I'm the guy. I'm finally going to get my chance again to be a head coach, and they kind of pull a fast one on him, at least in his eyes, and so he's pissed off. And Schwartz is kind of known as, if you remember the old Harbaugh pat on the back incident years ago, he's got a little bit of a temper or fire in the belly, so maybe it was a little bit of a quick trigger reaction from him, but ugly stuff for the Browns. Monken, I think, is a respected offensive mind around the league for sure. But when you make a hire and it pisses off a tenured and established assistant coach, and one, like you said, that the Browns definitely want to hang on to, that's not a good thing. So they've got some work to do. Talk to me about the salary cap, John. Some news dropped today, and we'll talk about how that also affects the Bengals. But the salary cap was the projected, I think there's a range that it's in, at least from what I've seen, but the projected salary cap number, we could talk about how that affects the Bengals.
Yeah, so last year the salary cap in 2025 is $279.2 million, and every year it's expected to increase by a certain percentage. This year it was projected to be like right below 300 million, and now according to Tom Pelissero, it's going to be between 301 and $305 million. Now, for reference, as former NFL executive Andrew Brandt puts it, each NFL team, before they do anything in terms of revenue sharing, they get well over $400 million from the NFL. And now $300 million in terms of accounting purposes is then used to pay the players. So this is a sign that the NFL continues to completely grow and explode as a business, and a certain portion of that goes back to the players. And I think the first initial reaction to this, Anthony, is that whenever the salary cap goes up, it's automatically a good thing for teams, right? It gives them more space, obviously, to spend on players, and gives them more flexibility. And for a team like the Bengals, who always prioritizes making sure that future cap health is always their top priority, having good cap health in the future before the cap gets set, and then the cap becomes even larger than you expect it to be, it naturally, it gives them more space than they expected, right? And more space for them means that they can spend more money. They can spend more money. And typically, on average, they spend about 4 to 3% in terms of cash for a single year. They spend 4 to 3% more cash than what the salary cap is for that year. So theoretically, not theoretically, but like the expectation is that the Bengals should spend north of $300 million in cash this year. That includes obviously contracts that are already agreed to, and they already have to pay those contracts for this year in terms of salaries this year. But it also includes any new money that they would spend in free agency or extensions this offseason. So I think they're projected. I think right now, like they're supposed to spend about
58.
200 million. What? I'm sorry. What?
The space is about 58, I think, right?
Yeah,
58
like
million.
yeah, in terms of like total space, it's like 58 million, and I think it's going to be a little bit more than that. But in terms of like the cash that they spend, it's going to be around 100 million in terms of this like
Okay.
new cash that they would spend on extensions and free agents and everything like that. I think though, Anthony, and I want to get your take on this, because the cap goes up for every single team, and we've seen other teams, more forward-thinking, progressive teams, structure these contracts in ways that it pushes future cap hits. It expands future cap hits, right? It puts all the cap numbers into the future because they know the cap is continuing to go up, and they structure deals in a way that it gives a lot of cash up front in terms of a signing bonus, and it guarantees future salaries, and it minimizes whatever the cap number is this year. It's basically the opposite of what the Bengals do in terms of how they offer contracts and free agency. I don't think the cap going up by this much is a good thing for the Bengals because they haven't shown the willingness to offer contracts that are relative and similar to what other teams do. I think the
Yeah.
cap going up like this is great news for every team who puts future cap numbers or who I'm wording this terribly, but you know what I'm trying to say. Like instead of just like front loading the cap hits like what the Bengals do, the teams that
Yeah.
backload cap hits with their free agent contracts, and the teams that obviously guarantee the salaries in order to do that, that's good news for them. And for the Bengals, though, it just means that every other team is going to inflate salaries for the players that they probably want to target. And it's going to make things harder for the Bengals in order to attract the players that they want because they're not willing to offer those contracts. But again, like that's kind of what we saw last year because the cap went up so much, and it's going up by a similar amount, if not more, this year. And I'm just a little worried about that.
So I want to touch on this, and I'm trying to remember correctly. Back in the kind of later-ish years of Marvin Lewis, when you saw extensions to like, Drake Kirkpatrick and some of these guys, and they ended up they didn't really live up to the end of the contracts, and there were hits towards the end of the contracts. Were those contracts structured where they spread it out, and then they kind of retreated from that because players aged? And this is a little bit more of a new thing. Because I seem to remember there were a couple things where they go, this is why we don't do this, because we're afraid that towards the end of this contract, you're not going to be the same player that this cap hit. I'm talking, again, 2014, 2015, 2016, back, 10 plus years. I seem to remember a few examples of that, and maybe this is more where they've retreated of late. And I think you're right where this does, because of how, at least in this Zach Taylor era, that's how they've structured more of their contracts, where it is kind of a front load type of thing. And it puts them at a disadvantage this year. And also, sometimes also, depending on how players perceive their reputations, I know they got certain good grades in some areas from, how they operate to, the family issue, they mean like the treatment of families, or however they labeled that, they got a horrible grade. So might they need to, have a more aggressive contract out there than some other teams, should they be vying for somebody's services? We also know, John, that, we don't hear it as much, but they do the rollover, they do the rookie pool, and that factors into that. And, whether that's 10 million, it's probably going to be closer to 15 million now that the cap is higher, that they do that. So when you talk, that always gets explained to us, right? When you're talking about they've got 60 million worth of space, well, there's this and then there's this. Not a lot of teams do that, or at least openly discuss that that's the things that they're running into. So that gets whittled down. I know we've got a question also about it, and we'll get to that in just a second, about Chase Brown, but I think you're right. I think there is a bit of a disadvantage for the Bengals, even with this number increasing.
It just means that the value of cap space today is not as valuable as cap space next year or 2 years from now. And like I think with like the Geno and Dunlap deals from 2018, right? Both those guys were I think at the beginning of their 30s or at the end of their 20s. And yeah, they were front loaded in the sense of like they didn't want to be burned in case like these guys end up not being worth it at the end of their deals, and they can get out of these deals, or their cap hits are going to be smaller relative to what the cap eventually grew to a couple years down the line. And that philosophy hasn't necessarily changed. Like you see, like even last year, like the extensions for Chase and Higgins, they had pretty large year one cap hits. Whereas, like Justin Jefferson, for example, like his cap hit was pretty damn small for the first year of his extension with the Vikings because, again, like he put up a bunch of money into the signing bonus that gets prorated. And that's basically the bulk of your year one cap hit. And you have a minimum salary. But the Bengals, because they don't offer future guarantees to anyone else outside of Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow, they have to incentivize players with their offers by saying, hey, you can get a pretty sizable year one salary. You can get even more cash in year one. And that's the front loaded aspect of it. And then it means that the cap hits later down the line for the contract are going to be smaller compared to other contracts that other players sign. But again, if the cap keeps going up every single year, then it doesn't hurt to have imploded or ballooned cap hits at the tail end of these contracts, because again, you're going to have space to absorb that, and you're not going to be in cap hell necessarily. But the Bengals are so scared that if the contract doesn't work out, then they can't get out of it, and then they're not going to have the 60 or 50 million in annual space that they always have, regardless about who's on their team. So again, for the teams that recognize that the cap continues to increase, barring another pandemic, right? Because that was the only reason why the cap went down a handful of years ago. Like that's going to be the reality. Like the NFL continues to just vacuum in our money on a yearly basis in the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, right? So that's what a lot of these teams recognize. And that's why in January, what you expect free agency deals to look like in March end up being a lot smaller than what they actually are, because teams just recognize that I can just inflate these prices because the cap continues to go up.
And like you said, the Bengals are intentional about not putting themselves in a really bad salary cap situation. That's a double-edged sword. Obviously, you don't want to have this flurry of signings and mortgage long-term sustainability for short-term success. But the Bengals haven't really proven long-term sustainability anyway. So they need to figure this out, obviously, with the salary cap changing. We're going to be here for just a little bit longer, and we're going to take some questions. Want to remind folks that this show is brought to you by America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel. Go make your Super Bowl bets on FanDuel.com. You can go check that out. And, of course, please gamble responsibly. And, of course, our show is also brought to you by the Fans Only company, FOCO. Both of those logos right down at the bottom of the screens there. So go click the links in our show description to help out our sponsors. We appreciate their support of the Believe in Cincy podcast channel, the Believe Podcast Network, and the Orange and Black Insider. All right, let's get to some of these questions. And this was one that we've been asked a lot over a couple of days, and this topic keeps coming up. And now I think it was Mrs. Reisner who posted something about a house in Kansas, and we don't know where we're going to be this year. We don't know how much time we're going to spend in this house in Kansas, but we're both from Kansas and Kansas City and all that kind of stuff.
Kansas
I guess
State.
Kansas, yeah, he went to Kansas State. So it appears that Dalton Reisner may be doing that old mercenary type thing again this year, where he may be seeking things. But he was a really good signing for the Bengals. I think PFF tabbed him as the best offseason signing, and one that the Bengals didn't really make a lot of splashy moves. So, yes, I think they should re-sign Dalton Reisner. I think he is a good player, can play both guard positions, and holds up well in pass protection. He did not show signs of slowing down. And I know Chuck wrote Chad Brown. He did mean Chase Brown. There are talks, I believe, that Chase Brown and the Bengals are working on a contract extension, something that is deserved for sure.
100%. There's two different deadlines for these guys, which is why neither one is signed. The deadline for Reisner is going to be, the beginning of free agency, and the deadline for Chase Brown is going to be at the beginning of the season, because Chase Brown has 1 year left on his contract and Dalton Reisner is about to be free agent. The reason why Dalton Reisner isn't signed now is because the deals that you would see nowadays, like right now, several weeks before free agency, are deals that players realize that I'm probably not going to get this on the open market, or this is going to be about what I would get on the open market. Tears heart Remember him from a couple years ago? The
Yep.
Bengals almost signed
Yep.
him. He got like 3 years, 37 million with like 20 million guaranteed from the Chargers in like the last couple days of January. And that's about probably what he would have expected on the open market. The Bengals obviously like to take their time with these negotiations and they like to ride players out. And they would have to offer Reisner something that he feels like I can't decline this. Like I have to sign this because I don't think it's going to get much better. And if I can get this now without having to worry about like going into free agency and all that stuff, like I want to be here. I want to be a Bengal. And this is like a really good deal that I don't think I'm going to be able to beat on the open market. That's how it would get done. But I don't think the Bengals are going to treat Dalton Reisner like that kind of player because again, like he's, on the other side of 30 and they didn't even sign him until late August. Like that's probably like their evaluation of him is probably around the same as what it was like in when they signed him in the first place. And that's why like I think there's interest in obviously bringing him back, but the reason why he isn't signed is because they're not going to wow him with an offer in January when they can offer him something like in late February, early March, and just have him think about that and until free agency starts. And maybe they can tweak it a little bit when that deadline comes around, but I don't think
Right.
you're going to see any moving here until they actually have to.
I'm in agreement with you, and I don't know that that's the right move for the team. I hope that they kind of maybe learned the Jesse Bates, DJ Reader lesson. Not saying necessarily that Reisner is on the same level of guys that of skill that those guys are, but obviously the offensive line has been an issue up to this year. Things looked a lot better, and Reisner was a big part of that. So and guys in the locker room, I think it was Orlando Brown Jr. After the season concluded, heaped a lot of praise on him, saying, this is a guy that was very valuable to the unit and that sort of thing. So, again, also, John, this offensive line is also when you do have solid players in tow, it's about continuity. And, when you have a veteran guard next to a veteran center in Ted Karras, who Chase Brown told us that was his leadership was invaluable this year. And now you're getting Amarius Mims getting closer to the prime of his career. You probably have, another year or so of good play from Orlando Brown. Why would you, in this, it's the best off the offensive line has looked in the Joe Burrow era. Why would you tweak that? Why would, and give yourself another need that you need to address in the draft or free agency? And it seems to make sense. He wants to be here. He liked it here. Guys are lobbying for him. So it makes sense. And I think you would agree too, that Chase Brown, it's kind of a weird time for running backs. They got devalued and now they're kind of coming back a little bit in terms of the valuation and how leagues look at him, particularly a guy with his skill set that can do a number of different things.
Yeah. And I think with Chase Brown, if I were him, I wouldn't want to sign in the beginning at the end of January when it's possible that free agents at the position can make a little bit more money than they're expected, and then the market itself just kind of rises and jumps. And I think the Bengals they would want to bring him back, but again, they're never going to be that organization that gets ahead of that, right? They ended up paying a lot more for Jamar Chase because of that exact same philosophy and that exact same lack of progressiveness, if you will. So I think if you're Chase Brown, you want to wait until the beginning of the season just to see how much the running back market continues to expand. I think Spotrac has his projection at like 10 million a year for an extension, and that may be more than what the Bengals are willing to pay for a running back nowadays because of how much money that they're spending on other parts of the offense, obviously with their two receivers and quarterbacks. So I think it might be a situation in which both sides wait to see if they can find something towards the beginning of the season.
We're going to be here for a few more minutes and answer a couple more questions for everybody. This one is pretty straightforward. I don't know that we need to spend a ton of time on this. From Overzealous. I know Overzealous is someone who's been watching our show for a long time, so appreciate the support. Are you guys okay with Zach Taylor being our head coach? Really, it doesn't matter. That's the case. That's my stance on it. It doesn't matter if we're okay with it or not. You have to be okay with it because that's what it is. We can talk about the AFC North and all the changes there and why not with the Bengals, that sort of thing. We can also talk about, this has to be his last chance, that sort of thing. I do believe that, given his contract and just the Bengals not making the playoffs the last handful of years, even with some severe Joe Burrow injuries. But, whether or not we like it, we don't like it, or both, it's just, to me, John, it is what it is. They got to just move forward regardless of the mindset. The Bengals have made their decision. They are not moving on from Zach Taylor. So do the best that you can with it.
Yeah, that is the mindset that the organization should have, and I think what people should have in terms of like how they think about the team going forward. Because this conversation can't be had until like next November or December at the earliest, right? As someone who did think that the Bengals needed to move on from Zach after this year, I'll make a slight case in terms of why it's okay that he's still around. Number one, there were so many firings and openings and vacancies, and this head coaching search has been so chaotic in a way that's like, I think if the Bengals were looking for a head coach, it would have looked a lot like Cleveland, to be honest with you. Like they would have.
I am in agreement with you. Yep.
Where it's like, yes, like the idea of moving on from Zach, I think it definitely needs to be a conversation that's worth having, and it needs to happen eventually if they don't get over the hump, and because just for the sake of just bringing in someone new at a certain point. But knowing what this search and this hiring cycle was, I don't think it would have been particularly great for the Bengals. Even the Bills, like, the fact that they had Josh Allen at their disposal, they have a quarterback in place and someone that you would think an offensive play caller would run, to get. Like, they ended up promoting from within, and their offensive coordinator and Joe Brady. I don't know if it's because they couldn't attract certain candidates they wanted. I don't know if it's because they fired Sean McDermott too late. The process could be any number of things, but I don't have, looking back at it now retrospectively, I don't have a ton of confidence that the Bengals would have handled this hiring process with effectiveness, and I don't think they would have been able to attract one of the best candidates. So that's a factor into it as well. And also on top of that, yeah, I've completely lost my train of thought there. I
I
don't
was going to say,
remember
did I need to hit the reset button on the old Nintendo system?
Oh, yeah, I remember now. So I think if there's anything that you want to, like, in terms of, I wouldn't call this like blind, faith or optimism or anything like that, but you've at least seen them get close with Zach. You've seen them win 5 playoff games. You've seen them almost win a Super Bowl. It's not necessarily because Zach Taylor is a great coach. It's because when everything around him is working where it should be, like, he can be the guy to take you there. And it's just, at that point, it's just about luck. And you can't win a Super Bowl without luck. So there are coaches that I think are within the tier or the caliber of who Zach is as a head coach that have never gone that far. And I think it's fine if you want to put Zach. I would put Zach in the, below the average in terms of where you have him as the head coach, but you've at least seen the team get far with him. And there's reason to believe that with one more try, he could potentially do it again. So it's not like it's just completely hopeless and that they can't win a Super Bowl. They almost did with him. It just ended up being bad luck at the very end of the game. And because they didn't do enough probably in the offseason to bolster the offensive line, but at least there's some almost proof of concept, which is, I guess, more than what you could say with other head coaches of a similar caliber.
And I mean, despite the flaws that people point out about him, I mean, he has shown relative competence, and I like what you kind of said there. He has shown an ability with a talented roster to manage that talent and just kind of, I mean, but it's when the roster gets depleted, it's when injuries happen to star players, that sort of thing, where it gets really ugly. And that part of that is his fault. Part of it is the team's fault for not stocking the roster with enough backloaded talent, that sort of thing. And part of it, like you said, is either good or bad luck. So I think there are positives there. Obviously, there are some other names that I think a lot of people would rather see in Cincinnati. I would be interested, not again to shove Zach out of the door, but I would have been interested either this year or if it does come to fruition next year, if there are some big names or, established names, Super Bowl winning coaches who would be interested in coming to Cincinnati simply because of coaching Joe Burrow and maybe overlooking some of the organizational deficiencies. And it would be interesting to see how things would weigh out with that. We're going to be here just a couple more minutes. I think there are another question or two in here that we want to get to. One, I want to lean on you for, John, because these are Ohio State guys. And where did that one go here? It's about 2 prospects. Where is it? Did it get deleted? I don't see it. There was
from Pete Crawley at 4:55 Eastern, which would be worse, drafting defensive tackle Caden McDonald.
Yes, that's the one I was looking for. I don't know how I passed it. Anyway, yeah, those are the 2 that. Yeah, here it is. Finally, it got lost in the shuffle there. At P. Crawley, which would be worse, like you said, drafting defensive tackle Caden McDonald, a big boy, or wide receiver Carnell Tate in the first round. Carnell Tate didn't have 1,000 yards, but had 9 receiving touchdowns. We talked about Mekhi Lemon in a slot option. I mean, you're seeing these teams starting to kind of load up on, wide receivers like the Bengals have done. We have mentioned the need for, a slot guy and a guy who can play outside and inside, but a guy who can manage the slot and work well like a Tyler Boyd. So your thoughts on that? And obviously, the Bengals getting beef up front with Caden McDonald. I think he's close to 330. Big old guy. But which would be worse in your eyes, John, and early in this process?
I don't know, man. Like it is very early in this process, and I'm not entirely sure where Caden McDonald is projected to go. I can probably look that up real quick with our A to Z Sports mock draft database, and we can look at average draft positioning for every major player in the NFL draft. And I'm just speaking in elongated sentences to have a filibuster before I realized that Caden McDonald is 30th in the ADP in the mock draft database, whereas Carnell Tate is projected to be like a top 10, top 5 pick. So in pure value, probably McDonald's worse. I think obviously wide receiver is slightly more valuable position than defensive tackle on average, but obviously with the Bengals case, because they have 2 great receivers there, it becomes a different argument. Defensive tackle is a greater need for them. If they draft Carnell Tate, it's purely just like he is the clear best player available, and that'd be a weird first 9 picks to go off the board in order for that to happen. But yeah, if you can find a role for having Tate as your starting slot and have a plan for him, I feel like that would just be better, I guess, than Caden McDonald. But I'm not like dismissing McDonald as a prospect. I think there's still more that we need to learn about him and to see if he's worth the top 10 pick. But I think right now you probably rather trade down for McDonald if he's not projected to be drafted in the top 20 picks.
Yeah, where does A to Z have Tate on there?
Number 9.
Yeah. So again, this goes back to my whole argument of, maybe the Bengals on their draft board have Tate above a Mekhi Lemon, right? And if you're at 10, the board falls a certain way. Your Peter Woods, your Reuben Baines, your Caleb Downs, all the guys that you may be targeting with that 10th pick, just domino effect and go off the board right in front of you. We know the Bengals don't like to leapfrog other teams up to get a premier player. They've shown that time and time again. So if they stay put at 10, those guys and a number of those defensive guys go in front of you. If you are looking at, even if you have it a 1A, 1B wide receiver, Tate and Lemon, you're looking at a top prospect as opposed to a guy that maybe is down in the pecking order for his position group, at least as of this time. They have to test, they have to do a lot of different things. So to me, again, I think if you were to stay at 10 and you're looking at one of the top 2 wide receivers on your board at number 10, and a lot of defensive players that you wanted have gone, or you're looking at a guy who's maybe 3rd, 4th in the interior defensive line in this class, you have to look at positional value. I know positional value in the way of, this is our top ranked guy at this position on our board. This guy's down our board a bit. I think right now McDonald would probably be, like you said, a trade back, get another pick or 2 and get him later in the round. Whereas Tate, like you said, would probably be a top 10 talent right there that, you lean into the offense, you lean into that Joe Burrow identity, like we talked about with Lemon, and go from there. But you have to maximize that pick, and it has to be a player that is if you stay at 10, it has to be a high impact player. I think a lot of people think defense, obviously. It could be an offensive player. We don't know. I think Daniel Jeremiah had a cornerback, the Bengals taking a cornerback out of Tennessee in his latest mock, who didn't play this year. He was injured, but was a top player in 2024. So, there are a lot of options, but it has to be, to me, if the class falls a certain way at up until 10, it has to be a guy that is at the top of your pecking order, positional order. Otherwise, you're just not getting the value that you could at a pick like that.
100%. I think there are levels in terms of prerequisites for what this pick needs to be, but one of them should be someone who just allows you to win games in like that just adds talent in a way that, like, it just, either whether it's on defense or if it's on offense, like someone that's a difference maker that can just make it easier for you to win games, like, at the end of the day. Like, I think the team is set up in a position where they have the quarterback and they have enough talent around him to a certain degree on offense where like they can be competitive against pretty much any team, but just any sort of high end talent that can take them over the hump there, like that is that it can't be understated. It can't be overstated. Jesus Christ, I'm having a tough time talking. They can't be overstated how important that is in terms for a team that is looking to win the games that matter, because you just seen it time and time again. Like these games are decided not just by quality coaching and decision making, but superstars making superstar plays. And if Cardinal Tate is that, so be it.
Yeah. Well, that's probably going to do it. We had another question from our guy Sports with Strawberry Ice. I'm hopping on that show right after this one. So
hold on, Anthony.
Yes. Was there another one?
We got an old friend in the chat, Terrell.
Oh, Terrell Howell. Yeah.
Yep.
When we had he used to call us when we had our phone number. What's up, guys? This is a real long time friend. I just wanted a playmaker at safety. And what about Shamar Stewart bulking up and being a new Larry O? I like that idea. I'm still not totally a fan of, let's put this potentially a square peg in a round hole, or round peg in a square hole, whatever the motto is there. But I'm not a big proponent of that, but who knows? I mean, he's a guy that can move around a little bit. He has shown the ability to, he was inside on some plays and, made some noise, but either way, it's a huge year for Shamar Stewart, especially if the Bengals are, as they seem, going to pivot off of Trey.
I do agree about safety. Like they need someone that can come downhill and make some good tackles, and maybe someone that can get into passing lanes. And we'll see what they do in free agency there, because I doubt they're going to wait until the draft to address there. But yeah, with Stewart, like the thought of like moving him, it just makes me think like, man, it's so important to make sure that you draft a defensive lineman that is just good at the position that he's drafted to be in. So you're not Zach Cartering him, entering year 2 and then like
exactly.
With that, it's just like it just happens so many times, and it's because the evaluations of these guys, what you're looking for, it's not a complete picture. You're missing key information here that's preventing you from making the smart decisions. And with Shamar, I think it's like you want that speed and that explosion off the edge. It's so valuable. It creates pressure in such a valuable way. And whereas, like, obviously, it's valuable inside too, but you don't know how effective he's going to be there because he's never really been an expanded player there. He hasn't had expanded playing time rushing inside. It's something that you can do like 5 to 10 times a game, a la Wallace Gilberry, but I don't want you sacrificing any speed and explosion by beefing him up there. Like it's just about see what he can do at edge, and if he can't win at edge, then it's probably just a bad pick.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. I love the Wallace Gilberry comp. The Bengals tried to do this thing. You mentioned Zachary Carter. Remember Marcus Hardison, another guy that they tried to do. It's just, and the other element to Shamar Stewart this year, John, is you try and let's say they're thinking about moving him more to a full-time instead of a rotational inside type of thing. If you move him kind of as a position, you're talking about a guy who's in his second year and missed a ton of offseason time last year. So now you're trying to build off of him coming back late in the rookie season. You're trying to build off of him. And now you're almost starting from scratch again a little bit, saying, okay, now this is a different position. We're going to teach you this one. And you missed all of last season. I think that's something that they look at more down the road. And like I said, I think it's more of a sprinkle in to start his career, see what happens, keep him at edge, particularly with Trey seemingly out of the door, but we'll see what happens there. This is the Orange and Black Insider. Thanks for getting Terrell's question, by the way. P. Crawley, gotta say, oh boy, 1 or 2 things to make the Bengals have to do for success. Defensive line and maximizing the value of where they're picking, because those first 2 picks, you've got 2 in the top 45 or so, I think. So you got to get 2 immediate impact guys, and you got to have them healthy on the field. So defensive line and free agency to me, and then maximizing those picks. Thanks for the super chat, P. Crawley. What do you think, John?
I think that's exactly it. And like Overzealous is saying, like, without Trey Hendrickson, where's the quarterback pressure coming from? Like that's an underrated talking point of the offseason. The fact that the Bengals are more likely than not to let their best defensive player walk, and they have to replace him while also, making the defense around that position better. It's not going to be particularly easy, especially because of what we know about them tying their own hand behind their back when offering these contracts. So it needs to be a very efficient and successful free agency period of beefing up the defensive line so that you don't go into the draft absolutely needing one or two pass rushers to contribute immediately. If that's the case and the best player is, a pass rusher at 10 or 41 or wherever it is in the first couple of rounds, so be it. And that adds to the group, but they need to add talent there, and it will make the rest of the defense better, regardless of who they add at safety and linebacker. So I would imagine they'll sign a safety and linebacker, but who they add along the defensive line is so important. And like you said, making sure that they don't light those picks on fire.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, P. Crawley, for the super chat. Thanks all of you for tuning in live and after the fact to the Orange and Black Insider, part of the Believe Podcast Network and the Believe in Cincy podcast channel. And of course, get it through your favorite streamers, favorite platforms. We are there. Go check out what FanDuel is setting up for you heading into the Super Bowl, America's #1 sportsbook, and go check out exclusive NFL merchandise at FOCO.com, the fans only company. John, thanks, buddy, and appreciate you. Stay warm, my friend. Get through it. I'm with you. Not really, but I am with you. I hope you do. You stay safe and all that kind of stuff, because I know that conditions can be a little bit dicey and dangerous. So everybody stay safe and be good out there. I am hopping on to Strawberry Ice's show, so go hop over there if so inclined. And of course, keep it to cincyjungle.com and A to Z Sports, and check out John and I's chat with T. Higgins and Chase Brown from earlier this week. That's on YouTube. It's embedded in some articles on both of those sites and all kinds of different places. So, John, appreciate you, buddy. Have a good weekend.
Wear some sunscreen.
I don't know. I don't know about that.